Welcome to the Anime Glossary. To celebrate this time of the year that's oh so great for curling up with a hot drink and watching the same 4 shows, why not share the greatest gift of all, anime terminology. Some of this we've done much larger and longer and deeper videos on, but this will be the super quick, super accessible version. Think of it as a Christmas treat from us. Today we're starting with the absolute basics, so if you've ever wanted to introduce your friends to anime but didn't know how, then this is the video to send them. Anime is, in its simplest form, animation made in Japan. Anime can be original productions or adaptations from other mediums. They are as diverse as the people who make them, because anime is a medium, not a genre, and so can be about anything. You will often hear about anime being full of action and bombastic fight scenes, but if you're not into that, there's also drama and romance and thrillers and horror and many, many more. If you want to get into anime but don't know where to start, think about what kinds of things you already like, and I guarantee you there will be an anime you enjoy. Anime doesn't have a specific look, but will very often fall into a general, recognizable aesthetic. As a result, you might hear about games having an anime style. This aesthetic will change depending on who made it and what demographic they aimed it at. Anime tends to air weekly in Japan, with new shows starting 4 times a year, in spring, summer, autumn or fall, and winter. A lot of anime fans will watch popular shows weekly to keep up with the online conversation. But most importantly, if you're not from Japan, you get to experience a whole new world of ideas and concepts. Engaging with stories from all over the world is a great way to expand your horizons, even if those stories are about fighting demons with a big sword.
Manga are just comics made in Japan. As with anime, there is a specific style associated with the medium, but it still has a lot of variety. Manga are often published a chapter at a time in specialized magazines that conform to a certain genre or demographic, and print multiple series on a weekly or monthly basis. To save on time and printing costs, this is often in black and white, with color spreads reserved for special chapters and first appearances. If they do well, a series will be released as a collection of chapters known as a tankobon, with better quality printing, additional art, and authors' comments. In more modern times, manga may be uploaded to online platforms like Jump Plus, Pixiv, and Gangan Online. Manga are made by mangaka, with ka meaning specialist in something and manga meaning, well, manga. It's fairly common for a manga to have 2 mangaka, with one working on the art and the other on story. Mangaka will also have assistants to help them with the art, and many popular mangaka get their starts as assistants before submitting their own manuscripts for publication. Popular manga tend to be adapted into anime, light novels, stage plays, audio dramas, live action shows, as well as being adapted by other countries. For instance, the Tom Cruise movie Edge of Tomorrow is an adaptation of the manga All You Need Is Kill.
A light novel is a book format popular in Japan that tends to be shorter than a regular novel and is physically smaller. Because of this, they tend to come out frequently with several volumes a year. A lot of light novels will have anime-style illustrations throughout, and will often go on to be adapted into anime and manga. Despite this, the original style may shift or completely change between adaptations. Light novels may also start their lives as web novels on sites like Shosetsuka ni Naro. Light novel publishers look at places like this to find potential stories to be published physically, as well as running contests with publishing being the prize. This means a lot of light novels will be written by one novice writer over a long period of time. They can be any genre, but they do have a reputation for being lowbrow with little substance to them. For example, the isekai genre was heavily adopted by light novel authors with varying degrees of competency. Despite this, there are still unique and interesting stories found in the medium. Light novels have become more popular in the West in recent years, and are beginning to get translations into English, French, and German. They are often a source of memes online due to their outlandish premises or long titles. These titles basically exist to function as a quick summary to stand out on online platforms where they're up against thousands of other series.
Sub and dub are the 2 key ways non-Japanese fans experience anime. Subs are subtitled translations with the original audio, and dubs have the audio dubbed over by different voice actors in a different language. It's been an ongoing debate in the anime community over which is better, but the answer is, it comes down to personal taste. A lot of the debate was due to the fact that most older dubs were done by inexperienced and small teams. It's become a more professional industry nowadays, so your average dub is likely to be of good enough quality. Dubs are a great way to immerse yourself in an anime, as you'll be able to receive far more information from voice acting in a language you understand. It's also great if you want to watch something while doing something else like housework or writing YouTube scripts. Because dubs are more costly to produce, smaller shows won't get them, so getting used to reading subtitles will allow you to experience way more shows. They can also be a good way to practice Japanese listening skills, immersing yourself in Japanese culture, or to force yourself to focus solely on what you're watching. And experiencing both can be a good way to re-experience an anime without it seeming too repetitive.
There are 4 key demographics for anime and manga. Shonen, which is aimed at teenage boys, Shoujo, which is aimed at teenage girls, Seinen, which is for adult men, and Josei, which is for adult women. There's also Kodomo, which is aimed at children and is less gendered. Each demographic has its own tropes and conventions, but the lines between them can become blurry. These demographics are also heavily tied to the manga publishing industry, which uses them to categorize magazines and the manga that go into them. Because of this, a lot of anime original stories have no demographic, because it's not relevant. A lot of popular anime and manga fall into the shonen category, so it can often feel like that's all there is. But anime and manga are just mediums with various stories to tell. There is no one who wouldn't be able to find an anime or manga that they would like. Personally, we love to give recommendations for anime and manga, and demographics are a great starting point for working out your tastes. So if you want a recommendation, feel free to ask. This is one of those topics we've gone into so much depth on, so check out our brief history of anime demographics video on our main channel if this has piqued your interest.
An otaku is a person with a strong interest in something. This can be anime and manga, but trains, history, and idols are all popular interests with their own subcultures. Otaku can be any age or gender. In Japanese culture, being an otaku can be seen as a negative thing, as they may place their interests above socially acceptable things, like having children. Otaku are often stereotyped as having poor social skills and being strange, quite a lot like the Western concept of a geek or nerd. However, in more recent years, this negative view has been shifting and self-identification as an otaku is much more likely. It's also a popular term amongst Western fans of anime and manga who use it as a loan word to denote someone who is a nerd specifically about Japanese media. Be this anime, manga, video games, or even just general culture and history. Otaku have even been studied by academics in Japan for their extreme interests and how they fit into Japanese society. They have been categorized into various subtypes and examined for their contribution to the Japanese economy.
If you've spent any time around anime fans, you might have heard them talk about their waifu, or their husbando. That's basically them talking about their favourite characters. Your waifu is your favourite female character, and your husbando is your favourite male character. Although, often, waifu is used regardless of the character's gender. The words are, as you might have guessed, borrowed from the terms husband and wife. Waifu's popularity outside of Japan is attributed to Azumanga Daioh in 2002, and use of the term waifu in Japan goes back to the 80s. Husbando, though, isn't used in Japan, as it's a complimentary term made by Western fans. Husband, transliterated into Japanese, is just hazu. There are people who take these terms very seriously, a lot like stan culture. For instance, you can only have one waifu or one husbando, and it has to be your absolute favourite because that is your actual wife now. But it also can be used casually. To me personally, it's casual, and I haven't actually said it out loud since I was like 19. Although, I have today. It's a little bit cringe, but so is being human, so if you have a waifu or a husbando, that's awesome, and if you don't yet have a character you obsess over, you will. Commonly, buying merch like anime figurines or dakimakura are a core part of expressing your love of your waifu. More recently, Eater bags have become a popular way for Western fans to signal who their waifu or husbando is to other potential fans.
Cosplay is a combination of the words costume and play. Cosplay can be its own subculture or an activity a person does as part of a different subculture. While the term is Japanese, the practice goes back centuries with costume balls where people would dress up as popular characters from books or folklore. It became a fandom activity in the 1960s with people wearing costumes to sci-fi conventions as an appreciation for the shows and comics they loved. These were handmade, and so the hobby was heavily dominated by women as they had more experience with sewing. Japan then borrowed the idea in the 70s, and cosplay became incredibly popular amongst similar conventions. This also led to a more established market for buying cosplayers than in the West, where homemade or imported costumes are the norm, although this domestic market is mostly contained to Tokyo. Cosplay tends to emphasize an accuracy to the character, and many cosplayers will act and speak like the character they're dressed as. But some people cosplay as a more casual activity, and the popularity of the hobby has meant that buying pre-made cosplays is much easier. easier. A strong ethos of cosplay is that it is for everyone regardless of gender, race, or religion. Crossplay is specifically cosplaying as a character opposite your gender and is a very common practice in both casual and professional settings.
Iyashikei is a genre that only really exists in Japan. The word means healing or healing type, and is a subgenre of slice of life that's even more chill, even more relaxing, and focuses on small scale and simple stories. This genre was popularized after multiple environmental and economic tragedies struck Japan, and developed as a way to escape from reality and live in a relaxing, conflict-free world. Interestingly, Iyashikei tend to be published in seinen magazines, which are targeted towards adult men. The intention is to help working adults relax after work. The genre often overlaps with the cute girls doing cute things genre, so a lot of them are explorations of a specific hobby that tend to be popular with adult men. And by healing, it doesn't mean there's an absence of conflict or negativity, it's just a sense that everything will be okay in the end. For instance, Girls' Last Tour is a post-apocalyptic exploration of abandoned machines and military paraphernalia, but at its core, it's optimistic to the last chapter. Some people consider these stories boring, but I really enjoy them. As with all things anime, it's an entire industry and not everything will be for you, but if you want to unwind after a stressful day, check out some Iyashikei.
Mecha is a genre of anime and manga revolving around big robots. But the genre is much deeper than this, with explorations of social and political issues as well as crossing over with any other genre, be it comedy, romance, or just straight action. Some mecha anime like to focus on the minutiae of their robots, how they work, how they're used, and their impact on the world they're in. Others take a more fantastical approach with robots that prioritize being cool over being practical. This is a very similar distinction to the hard and soft divide in Western sci-fi. The genre dates back to the 1940s and has been iterated and subverted a dozen times over. Anime like Neon Genesis Evangelion popularized it to Western fans who were drawn to its esoteric and psychological plot. Mecha has been extremely influential in Japan and the West, with films like Pacific Rim and games like Battletech. However, it remains fairly constrained to Japan as a genre. You can still see that mecha influence with characters like Diva from Overwatch, but Western sci-fi tends to stick to its own design sensibilities. Outside of anime and manga, a popular pastime of mech fans is garage kits, which are sets designed for you to build and paint small-scale versions of mechs. While this can be any mech, Gundam is well known for their kits known as Gunpla, which have sold hundreds of millions of units since their debut in 1980.
OVA stands for Original Video Animation, and ONA stands for Original Net Animation. As you should hopefully know by now, most anime air on TV in Japan. So, with this information, what type of anime would try to bypass this incredibly established system? Well, of course, the most gory, the most sexual, and the lowest budget, right? Emerging in the 1980s, these were anime that could be sold direct to consumer or rented through video rentals. Often OVAs were commissioned as pilots. If they succeeded as an OVA, a TV studio would pick them up and commission a full season. OVAs also had the freedom of not being constrained to a specific time slot or needing to produce an episode length that was TV appropriate. You'll often see a lot of OVAs run in the 40 to 60 minute range. Some OVAs were a way for a studio to finish off a series when a TV studio had cancelled it, and others would include episodes that were more for the fans, without the need for a coherent plot, saving precious airtime. ONAs came onto the scene in the early 2000s, as broadband networks became good enough to reasonably stream video. As with OVAs, these were often atypical in length, but in this case, they would only be a few minutes. ONAs are very much the norm now, with a lot of anime being distributed through streaming services like Netflix and Disney+, circumventing traditional TV broadcasts entirely. This is vital in today's market, as there's just too much anime to be reasonably broadcast in a 24-hour period. Although almost all Chinese anime or donghua is distributed online.
Fanservice is service for the fans. This can often mean fan-favorite characters returning for a cameo, but in the context of anime and manga, it means sexualization regardless of gender. This is a very contentious topic, as there's a lot of people who dislike sex inherently. Just so you know, we are pro-sex here, and fanservice is another topic we've made a whole main channel video on. But the rundown is that fanservice tends to be sexualization that occurs in a way that is discordant with the show's presentation of characters. For instance, only having certain characters characters trip and fall exposing their underwear, when a non-fanservice character would not. The reason this is often so divisive is because fanservice can be at the expense of the plot or character progress. A good example is Tamaki from Fire Force. While I don't mind her gimmick, it's definitely true it can undercut some serious moments. But this isn't a problem with fanservice, it's a problem with poor writing. Sexuality in media isn't inherently bad, and often the fanservice in anime was targeted for censorship by US distributors who have a monopoly on English language anime and manga. Fanservice shows exist on a needed continuum of media experiences. As with Iyashikei, something light and titillating can be a good source of comfort and relaxation. And fanservice isn't just female characters performing for men. Women absolutely eat up fanservice. Look at Free. Long lingering shots on the character's abs? No way, that's not fanservice.
It's time to shout out our Patreon supporters. Thank you so much for supporting this channel. The support we feel from you guys is so helpful for pushing through when we have no energy and just want to rot in bed. God knows we've needed it working on this project. I can see why daily videos aren't popular anymore. It requires so much energy every day. You just have to do it. Every single day, with no breaks. If you want to support this channel, then feel free to subscribe to our Patreon and enjoy early access and behind the scenes videos, updates, and blog posts. Now, back to the video. AMV means anime music video. Often AMVs will be used to express admiration for a specific character or ship, and will be thematic to the song chosen. The first AMV was made in 1982 by Jim Kapostas and required 2 VHS recorders to produce. Digital editing made this process much more accessible, but almost always more elaborate, with some AMVs utilizing redrawing and very elaborate VFX. Blend W, for instance, is an act of AMV godliness for its use of techniques. This is very much a form of appreciation made by Western fans, and it's not normally done by Japanese fans. These videos would be posted to online sites like YouTube and animemusicvideos.org, which helped them function as advertising for certain shows as well as develop fandom spaces. Unfortunately, the combination of copyrighted music and copyrighted anime footage led to a lot of AMVs being targeted for DMCA takedowns. The immense transformative nature of AMVs has been a tricky debate for companies like YouTube for what is classified as transformative enough to be fair use. There are still people making AMVs on YouTube, but nowadays AMVs have been more replaced by TikTok edits which utilize a pre-existing template made by another user. If you want to watch some good AMVs, then you have to check out the best AMVs of all time, the YouTube channel, and Gigax AMVs are actually some of my personal favorites. They're really good even if he has taken them down now.
Filler is an interesting and unique phenomenon of anime. As you know, anime are often adaptations of manga, and in most cases each episode of anime will adapt more than one chapter of manga per episode, often about 4 chapters to one 24-minute episode, so it runs the risk of catching up to the manga. The anime will then have to take a roundabout path to avoid catching up, adapting much less of the manga per episode, slowing down the pacing, or just creating anime original stories. This padding is called filler. It was especially common with shonen anime as both chapters and episodes came out weekly and they would catch up much faster than other shows that had maybe 24 episodes in a year. There's much less filler in the modern anime landscape as studios will adapt a full season of a show and then wait for more manga to be made. This alleviates some of the slog that could have come from filler, but it does mean you as the audience spend a lot less time with your favourite characters, especially with the increase in seasons divided into 2 12-episode cours that can be almost a year apart. You might see people online calling anything that doesn't directly forward the plot filler. They are wrong. You basically don't see filler outside of the last few long-running weekly anime. A lot of the time these episodes are just slower or less focused on action. We have lots of ideas around filler and its importance, so you might see a main channel video on this topic at some point.
If you want to read something and can't read Japanese, what do? Well, you might have to head to an illegal manga website and read fan translations. Scanlation is a portmanteau of scan and translation. It's the practice of taking the raw Japanese pages, scanning them into a computer, and translating them. It's not quite that simple though. The process is quite lengthy with a lot of visual editing and art retouching to make the translated text look good on the page. The first notable Scanlation attempts were as far back as the 1970s by a group named Dedakai. Cosplay, but Scanlation really came into its own with the advent of the internet in the 90s and 2000s. Scanlations are almost always illegal and done by a group of volunteers. This kind of fan translation, in my opinion, is a necessity when dealing with foreign media. I can say without a doubt that anime wouldn't be nearly as popular outside of Japan today without fansubbers and scanlations. Even today, smaller and less popular manga will never be officially translated, so unless you know Japanese, scanlations are the only way you'll ever be able to experience them. The ethics of media piracy is a whole video in its own right, but basically, as with all piracy, this often isn't a loss of earnings, because these manga are entirely inaccessible to foreign markets. A lot of scanlation groups will try to operate ethically, and will drop a series once it gets an official translation, and will heavily promote the official channels to support the authors.
A Fujoshi is a woman who's a fan of yaoi. Literally meaning rotten girl, it was initially coined in the early 2000s as an insult, implying that these women were spoilt for marriage, but came to be reappropriated as a tongue-in-cheek acceptance of their love for yaoi. Fudanshi is just the gender-swapped version, rotten boys, boys who like yaoi. There are also terms for yuri fans too, himijoshi and himidanshi. These literally mean princess girl and princess boy, and is a much more recent term supposedly taken from the yuri magazine, Yuri Hime, in the 2010s. All four of these terms have roughly the same connotation, people who are more into fictional characters than real-life relationships. This isn't inherently a negative, you don't actually have to get married, and if staying inside reading about fictional characters makes you happy, why should you be forced to conform? They're broad terms, and there's a lot of variation between any one group of them. Some people may be okay with Fujoshis, but see Fudanshis as perverts and closeted gay men. It's an incredibly nuanced and complicated situation. We have a video coming out, hopefully this year, that dives much deeper into the topic of yuri and yaoi. If this has interested you, then look forward to that one whenever it comes out.
Harem as a term is derived from the Arabic harim, which means secluded or forbidden, and would refer to the area of a household where no men could enter. In English, it came to mean a collective noun for the many wives of one man. Commonly a Muslim man, but was also popular in China and many other countries. It is from this meaning that we get the Japanese genre harem, which is a subgenre of romance with one main character and multiple love interests. Popularized by dating sims in the 1980s, this was usually one man and many women who would represent various paths for the player to choose between. In this respect, it was less a harem and more a state of temporal instability where the player could influence the timeline the game progressed down. In the 90s, otome games would do the same but with a female protagonist and various male love interests. This would often be referred to as a reverse harem. There are harems that are homosexual in nature, especially in dating sims, that use yaoi or yuri as a selling point, such as dramatical murder or mizuchi, but these are less common. A lot of these visual novels are adapted into anime, and often have to deal with multiple routes. This normally goes one of two ways, picking an ending for the anime to follow, or having the main character go with all the love interests at once. Other anime are adapted from linear manga, like light novels or manga, and so the harem element becomes more a source of drama, as the main character has to get to know and eventually choose a love interest. It's a very common subgenre in romance and isekais, presenting various archetypes to appeal to different parts of the fanbase.
Weeaboo, or weeb, is a derogatory term for someone who is obsessed with Japanese culture. It's a relatively ubiquitous term in the anime and manga communities, but many weebs don't actually know the origin story. Back in the wild west of the early 2000s internet on 4chan, the term Wapanese was coined to describe those freaky little nerds who liked that Japanese shit a bit too much. Specifically, the types to decry their own country and glorify Japan. But it wasn't always used so cleanly. Moderators who were sick of the term being used in these online slap fights instituted a site-wide filter on the word Wapanese, and chose Weeaboo as its replacement. This was just a nonsense term from a webcomic of the time called the Perry Bible Fellowship, and was intended to reduce the whole debacle to terminology more fitting the severity at hand, which is to say, none. However, the arguments burned on, and so the word weeaboo was popularized as meaning overzealous Japanophiles. With time, that original derogatory meaning was watered down and adopted by a lot of weebs, especially as the already established connotation of fan of Japanese stuff made it a good way to distinguish yourself from the dweebs, nerds, and geeks. We both independently adopted the label as teenagers who were on the further end of this history, but there is still a sense of shame associated with the term, or liking anything just a bit too much for social acceptability. The term also became a blueprint for other obsessives of a certain country, such as a Weeaboo or a Weeaboo.
Cours are a relatively recent idea for anime and manga communities. It's a unit of time used for Japanese TV productions, roughly 13 episodes across a 3-month period. These cours start in January, April, July, and October. These 4 cours are also known by their season, and this is where winter, summer, spring, and fall anime originate from. The core is used to simplify TV production and allows the studio to have shorter term schedules. Because this was a production term, viewers never knew if they were watching a 1 or 2 course season. It was purely a behind the scenes process. However, about a decade ago, a lot of anime began to release using cours as part of the advertising. This directly coincided with the increase in anime productions as a whole and would allow a studio to have a more consistent form of advertising, as well as limit more anime to being only 1 or 2 cours. This would also be used as a sort of test run, with a second core not being guaranteed unless the anime did well, or to give the animation studio time to prepare for the next core in case of a split core, which is where an anime would air a core, then have a break of a core, and then air a second core. I feel like I've said core too many times. This would free up production for anime that actually made money, but this has many downsides. Primarily, the immediate viewership does not always indicate long-term success, and also priming audiences to not invest their time and emotions into a show because you may never get a resolution. The quantity and high standards for anime also mean that a lot of the time a studio can barely meet the deadline even on a split core, and later episodes may decline in quality. This is only slightly abated in anime specifically, as you'll have the manga or light novel to fall back on for the most part.
Of all the controversial things in the anime community, lolis are by far the most controversial. But stick with us here. Derived from the term Lolita complex, which pulls on the infamous novel Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov, used to describe the narrator Humbert's sexual attraction to a 12-year-old girl as being the girl's fault and her responsibility for seducing him. While the novel intended readers to be disgusted by Humbert and utilize the literary technique of an unreliable narrator, many people adopted Lolita as a term for young girls who were precocious, essentially the exact same behavior Nabokov was criticizing. Conversely, in Japanese, Lolita, Loli, and Lolicon are all derived from a different misinterpretation of the novel. Translated just a few years after the original, it was misunderstood as similar to a Japanese literary movement called shoujo bunka, or girls' literature. These novels portrayed girlhood as aspirational and positive. Lolita fashion is elegant, feminine, and about putting the desires of the girls who wear it over that of masculine views of sexual attraction, a complete inverse of the Western Lolita. Lolicon was used to denote otaku who preferred the emerging bishoujo style of the 1970s over the gritty gekiga movement. But once the bishoujo became the norm, the term shifted to be even more youthful than those already youthful character designs. A lolicon is specifically someone attracted to youthful anime girls and not real children, but many have argued it as a gateway attraction to pedophilia. This is almost entirely false, and many cases of supposed lolicons abusing children were exaggerated or fabricated during moral panics about the innate perversion of anime and manga as a whole. A loli is just a young or seemingly young character, and has no inherent morality as with any other archetype. The design sensibilities of loli characters can be used to influence how a character should be seen by its audience. For instance, the platelets in cells at work are represented as small childlike girls to emphasize their delicate nature and need to work in large groups. Much like groups of kindergarten students navigating a big city. They're cute, and you want to protect them as they go about their daily work.
Moe is the feeling of cuteness towards an anime or manga character. Originating in the late 1980s, Moe really reached its peak of popularity in the early to mid 2000s. While it was originally describing a person's emotion towards a character, the industry's shift to appealing to otaku led it to becoming more of a term for a certain archetype. Moe characters would often be cute girls with unique designs to allow them to be better commercialized. While not overtly sexual, these characters were still supposed to create deep resonance in the audience, and portray these girls as your ideal friend. The cute girls doing cute things genre massively drew on this. Moe girls would often be young and clumsy or scatterbrained, so that you, the audience, would want to help and protect these girls in a sort of fraternal way. However, these characters can become overly designed and tropey, leading to the term moe blob. It was used to describe a character that exists only to pull on this sort of affection, but inadvertently being completely substanceless and not appealing at all. But this is a subjective term and would often be used to decry anime seen as too nothingy or not having enough action. One man's moe blob may be another man's waifu.
Omake means extra in Japanese.
Lucky Channel!
And is often used by anime fans to describe bonus features in a DVD release of an anime, but the word actually has much larger connotations to Japanese people. Omake can be DVD bonuses, but they can also be the small figurines or merch that comes free with a purchase. The practice has been around since the 70s, but is in wide use for pop-up cafes where coasters and other merch come free with the purchase of specific menu items. Omake can also be in anime in its raw aired form, and often take the form of a small skit at the end of an episode after the ending song has played. Many of these would treat the characters more like actors who would discuss the episode in a meta way or make jokes about the events that just happened. These omake are often very cheaply animated and may last only a few seconds. They will utilize limited animation and chibi character designs to help be cost effective and distinguish this as separate from the main anime. The Lucky Channel segments in Lucky Star are a good example of an omake with its own internal plot as well as fourth wall breaking in a diegetic way. Omake are also common in manga and are similarly small and cheap, often using sketchy chibi characters. It's also common for manga okame to be in a 4-koma format, which is a vertical paneling style consisting of 4 panels with a highly abridged story, normally with just a setup and joke.
In Japanese, Sakuga means to draw or to animate, but in Western fan bases, it specifically means to do that really, really well. Sakuga tends to be the opposite of limited animation. This is where the budget goes, and so will have higher frame rates, more detailed character models, or even an entire style shift to convey a certain emotion. It's also popular in Western fan bases to only focus on Sakuga, because that also tends to be where the fight scenes are on the scale of static panning image to dear god, I don't know lines could move like that. As it's relatively higher quality animation, the term can be used a little nebulously, because it's based on a personal frame of reference to a certain extent. The sudden shifts in quality are a trope in anime, but the concept exists in most animation, because it's just good production management to cut some corners here or there. Because if you don't, you end up with redline. Premiering in 2009 after a 7-year production, it featured 100,000 hand-drawn frames, and was critically acclaimed. It was also a commercial failure. That's 16 frames a second, by the way. The average episode of an anime TV series might be anywhere from 5 to 13 frames a second. The movie is incredible, by the way. The advent of digital animation meant that most modern anime are not entirely hand-drawn, and may use 3D or digital assistance for certain steps like coloring or digital interpolation, which allow anime to be made cheaper but not always better. But that's a whole other video, and I would really like to go to bed.
Doujinshi is the Japanese term for self-published printed works. This is often manga, but it could equally be light novels, or magazines. They typically have the reputation in the West for being horny fan works, and a lot are, but they can also be original stories. There is also a preconception that they're all amateurs. Again, they probably are. But at what point can you call yourself a professional? Is it when you make money? Because if so, we're professional YouTubers. If it's a certain quality, well, I've seen some real shit from traditional publishing. And the concept of doujinshi as a whole goes back over 100 years to the 1870s and 1880s. Unfortunately, it waned in post-war Japan. Improvement in technology of the 1970s made at-home and konbini printing much more commercially viable, and its coinciding with the boom in pop culture led to it becoming heavily fanwork based as opposed to 1800s doujinshi. This is also where we see it become more about pairing characters from existing media and exploring their relationships. Doujinshi have always been a collaborative activity, with the word itself being comprised of do, same, jin, person, and shi meaning a periodical publishing. Doujin as a term is also used much in the same way as fandom is in the West. a group of people united by a common interest. These groups are known as circles, even if it's just one person, and would typically attend comic conventions to sell their self-made works. In more recent years, a lot of circles have moved to digital distribution and print-on-demand services. Doujins exist in a legal grey area where it's basically acceptable until someone decides to complain, and then sue you. But generally, it's a relatively respected activity, and many mangaka got their start in doujin circles before moving to traditional publications. For instance, Yana Tobaso was originally making prints of tennis yaoi doujins before deciding to cut out the middleman and just make yaoi. I mean Black Butler.
We've done it! 24 anime terms. How many of them did you already know? Did you learn anything even if you knew all of them? We here at Mary Kiwi think it's really important to learn the terminology because with it you learn the history of the medium, and that only serves to elevate your enjoyment. It also means we can hear all the new terms that new anime fans have made slightly less. I know it's probably because we're old, but please God, don't call fanservice shows Guna shows. It's so painful, I hate it. If you didn't see, we made these videos as an advent series over on our second channel, Merriest Kiwi. It was really fun, if a little stressful to work on, and there's a lot of terms we didn't get time to cover. What terms do you think we should define for next year if we do this again? Thank you so much for watching, feel free to hit like and subscribe, or if you know anyone new to anime then feel free to share this video with them. To teach them some new terms, of course. We will see you all in the next video. Bye!